Hello, hello, good people, and welcome to the first lecture for interviewing and documentation. I want to begin this lecture first with just doing a little bit of housekeeping on some things. So this lecture is going to be comprised of just a brief overview of the first three chapters, chapters 1, 2, and 3 in our textbook. I encourage you greatly, good people, to make sure that you read over the chapters, whether you're reading them before you watch this lecture video or after, but please make sure that you read over it because I'm not going to be going over all of the information in the textbook, but I'm going to be highlighting some essential points that I want you to make sure that you make note of. Second thing I want to share with you is, as you saw, my curtain just moved. And that is thanks to one of my two dogs, either Bella or Queen. So I apologize in the beginning right now if there would be any interference or any background barking that you may hear. It's one of my two fur babies being busy, of course, throughout the day. Excuse me, but also I want to make sure I make mention that as I go through the lecture, I may be mentioning some of the case studies that you may see in the textbook. Please, good people, don't ignore those case studies in the textbook because actually there is going to be some case studies that may be referenced in our discussion post. So make sure you glance over those case studies, look at some of the information excuse me, in the boxes labeled, now you try it, or now what do you think? Because again, this is just an opportunity for you to think about what you're thinking about in terms of functioning as a helping professional. As we go through the textbook and as you read through it, you will notice that the title social worker is the focus of the profession being addressed here. And I need to share with you, when we talk about being a social worker, that is someone who has graduated from an accredited social work program, either a BSW, Bachelor's in Social Work, or an MSW, Master's in Social Work, or a DSW, excuse me, a doctorate in social work. Our associate degree program, the social work associate's degree and our social service assistant degree, they are not accredited programs. However, these programs are written, excuse me, and were created that you would have the option of transferring into either a social work, an accredited social work program, or a human services bachelor's degree program. So I don't want you to get tripped up by the terminology of social worker, because there may be times that I switch that up and refer to it as a helping professional, basically meaning one and the same, because our ultimate outcome, or our ultimate goal, I should say, is to empower those that are coming to see us, whether they are sick, injured, in need of, whomever they may be, and whatever title or frame of reference they may be functioning under, whether it be a client, a participant, a patient, a consumer. Basically, our job is to empower them so that they are able to get to the next level. All right? All right, good people. And forgive me as I clear my throat. I apologize for the continued experiences that I'm having with my sinuses, but please excuse me throughout the lecture. But let's go ahead and move on and begin talking about chapter 1. Now, chapter 1 in our text is basically for those who may have taken an introduction to social work or an intro to human services course. This chapter is going to be a refresher for you, and those who may not have taken it, this chapter is going to be an introduction to you basically on the helping profession or the helping process. So we're going to start out a little bit by excuse me, being introduced to two key figures in the helping profession, basically two key figures in the area of social work. The first one is Jane Addams. The second one is Mary Richmond. Now, Jane Addams, very prominent person in the field of social work, excuse me, as well as in sociology. If you're taking intro to sociology, you will see her name appear again in that textbook. Jane Addams is one who studied the way folks function within their environment. And so together with her colleague Ellen Starr, they established one of the settlement house movements in Chicago, and it was called Hull House. And within that settlement house movement, what Jane Addams and Ellen Starr did is that basically they did not provide services from like behind the desk type of thing. They did not have their clients, consumers, or patients come to them. Instead, these were women who took the services to the people. They not only provided services through Hull House, but they lived within the community so that they could become better acquainted with what the cultural norms were, what the issues would be, and what the needs are. Excuse me. So that's just a little bit of Jane Addams. The second person is Mary Richmond. Mary Richmond is a very important figure in the field of social work as well as in sociology. Mary Richmond is one who created the term and the process called social diagnosis. Now, we look at the social diagnosis similarly to the way that folks may look at a medical diagnosis. With a medical diagnosis, you're looking at what is the root of the problem, how's the problem continuing, and how can we treat the problem. And with the social diagnosis, it's kind of the same way, looking at the root of the problem, how is this, what are the elements contributing to the problem, and how can we treat the problem. Excuse me. So with that being said, Mary Richmond kind of gave us the foundation of how we may begin with looking at the whole person. Actually, Mary Richmond and Jane Addams, looking at the whole person, this ecological perspective. And we're going to get into that a little bit into chapter 2. But I just want to give you the layout of the land with those two very key people, Mary Richmond and Jane Addams. Now, as we go on throughout chapter 1, we also begin looking at excuse me, identifying and understanding the helping process in and of itself. Now, when we talk about the helping process as a helping professional, the textbook highlights for us 6 very specific stages of what may take place for you as a helping professional. And this is on page 5 in your textbook. So this may be something that you may want to highlight. The 6 stages that the book highlights are engagement, assessment, planning and contracting, treatment and intervention, evaluation, and termination. These 6 stages are basically what takes up the first half of our chapter 1. So when we're looking at engagement, when we talk about engagement and intake, we're looking at working with our client and talking with our client, consumer, or patient, and getting the history behind what's bringing them in. The history behind how they've been functioning and how they've been addressing or working with or coping with the problem that brought them in to see us. I need you to be mindful of something, good people. When folks are coming in to see you, they're coming in because they're sick, injured, in need of, seeking some help or guidance in regards to something. So with that being said, it's important that when we talk about the intake and engagement, that we begin to establish a good, strong foundation in our working relationship. It is not our goal, good people, to make friends. That's not our goal. Our goal is to establish a working relationship, one with respect, from worker to client and from client to worker. That's our intake and engagement. Again, this is just a brief overview of it, so please make sure you read through that in chapter 1. One of the key things that we look at when we're talking about engagement with our client, consumer, or patient, as we build that working relationship, is we always want to make sure we maintain our focus on client success. It's not about you, not about the alphabet soup behind your name. It's not about how many papers you've written, how many tears you've cried. It's not about how many institutions you've attended. It's always going to be about the client. I just want you to be mindful of that and keep that in mind. The second stage is going to be assessment. When we talk about assessment, we are looking at, again, identifying with our client, consumer, or patient what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. This is where we get into, and again, when we go into chapter 2, we'll talk about this a little bit more. Excuse me. This is where we get into looking at the whole person, that ecological perspective, making sure we gather enough information that is going to give us a good picture about what our client may be experiencing. The third thing that we look at is going to be planning and contracting, planning, problem solving, different things like that. When we talk about our planning and contracting, some of the issues that we want to make sure that we address are, or I should say not some of them, but all of them, are always going to be client focused. It's easy for us to get distracted when we start talking about planning, that we would want to do things according to what we think needs to have happened. And now granted, our expertise is needed, but we always want to be mindful that this part of the state or this stage in our working relationship This has to be an agreement. This has to be a stage where the client is actively participating. They have to take ownership and accountability when we're talking about getting this plan and setting our goals. So some of the things that we look at in this stage when we're talking about, again, the planning and the contracting, is looking at our goals. We're looking at our time frame, what we're looking, or I should say, when are we going to reach our goals? Looking at our action steps. What is it that has to be done in order to reach our goals, and who's responsible for that? Because be mindful, while the goal is focused on the client's success, it's not always the client that's going to be responsible for seeing some things happen. You too, as the helping professional, are going to have a role to play in helping the client meet their goals. One of the other things we want to make sure that we also address when we're talking about this planning and the contract is we want to make sure that we establish a strong contract with the client. Again, making sure the client is involved and that they are having feedback or input into how this contract is going to be spelled out. The fourth thing that we look at is treatment and intervention. With treatment and intervention at this stage, it is important to encourage our client, again, to follow through with what their tasks are supposed to be in meeting their goal. Client accountability. That is the whole focus when we're talking about treatment and intervention. Client accountability. You still have a role there too, because there are some things, like I stated before, that you, the worker, are going to be responsible for. But client accountability and their participation in this process is key to their success. Excuse me. When we're talking about client accountability, we want to make sure that we are providing them with the appropriate resources and referrals that are going to help them be successful on their journey. We want to make sure that we are creating strong alliances with our clients, consumers, and patients. And by alliances, I mean, with those resources and referrals, we're not just setting them willy-nilly any place and every place just because we think that they should. We want to send our clients, consumers, patients, give them referrals, again, that's going to be beneficial to their success in reaching their goals. Excuse me. We also want to make sure that the resources, the list of resources that we have, we got to make sure that that's current, that that's up to date. And one of the ways that we do that, I'm going to say here in Cambria County, is we have an organization, and it is the Cambria County Health and Welfare Council. There is also an association in Somerset. I believe there's one also in Blair County as well. But through the Cambria County Health and Welfare Cambria County Health and Welfare Organization, this is where representatives from area social service agencies get together once a month and discuss new programming, changes in programming, resources that are available to clients, consumers, and patients. It's a nice, strong networking event. So those, again, just an opportunity to make sure we have our resources up to date and that we're accountable. The fifth one, as I move through this, evaluation. Very, very important, good people, when we talk about evaluation, because we need to know that what we're doing is beneficial for not just our client, but our entire client base. When we talk about evaluations, and we're going to get into this a little bit more, this is where we begin to look at the type of evaluation that we are, or the type of information that we're getting from the evaluations that we're completing. Excuse me. So with the evaluations, we want to look at how successful clients are and how successful they are not, and what are some of the variables that are contributing to their success or contributing to the hurdles, we'll say. We won't say to their failures, because no client is going to be a failure. Not when you're sitting at the table. All right? Okay, so the last one that we're going to talk about is termination. When we talk about termination, we have to be mindful that this working relationship does not last forever, okay? And with it not lasting forever, there has to be a means to an end. So the termination actually is going to begin in the very beginning when you begin your intake and assessment. Because you're going to be talking with your client about how the working relationship is going to terminate. So termination can happen in a number of different ways. And our book outlines 6 specific ways that this working relationship can terminate. One of them is that the client begins to become disengaged. They become disengaged by showing up late for appointments or not showing at all. Another way that we see termination is that the worker is sensing that the client no longer wants to be successful in or no longer wants to have the working relationship. There's also termination in that the client has met their goals, they've reached their goals, and so there's no longer a need for this working relationship. There's termination that takes place when clients are unable or refuse to pay their outstanding bills. Now, and that sometimes can happen when you have services that are offered on a sliding scale. Not all services through a social service agency are offered at a, or I should say, or a paid for service type of agency that you work for, but there are some that offer services on a sliding scale. So that's a little overview of the helping process. The very last thing that I want to go through today is going to be the roles of the social worker. When we talk about the roles of the social worker, there's three types or three areas that, again, we're introduced to this in chapter 1, and we get into it a little bit more detail in other chapters. Three specific areas that we look at of social work practice. We have the micro level, the meso level, and the macro level. When we talk about the micro level type of social work is where we see the focus is on the client and working one-on-one with our client in order to have again, a good successful outcome. And when we talk about our client may not be just an individual, but our client could also be a group. It could be a family. It could be a community. It could be an organization. But that micro practice or that micro level, the focus is on the client. When we talk about that meso level or that meso layer. The meso layer, the focus is on the content of working with our client, consumer, and patient. When we talk about the content or the context of working with them, again, we're still working with them one-on-one, but it may be working with them from a group perspective or from the family perspective. When we get to that meso layer, or the meso worker, that meso level of working as a helping professional is going to be that we're looking at the larger picture, at the bigger picture of things. We may be looking at things that are related to the situation. We may be looking at the outside resources or outside elements that may impact the issue that the client, consumer, patient is coming to us with. Now, in your textbooks, and let me turn my page through real quickly. In your textbooks on page, one second, good people. It is on page 14. There is a nice figure that shows you the different roles that you can function in as a helping professional or as a social worker. Now, the key to this, why I want you to look at this figure on this page, is because I need you to be mindful that when you have your generalist degree, a generalist degree as a social worker or a social service assistant, you have the foundation to be flexible to function in any of these given roles that are here. To function as a case manager, function as a broker, function as an advocate, as a facilitator, as a community change agent. So I want you to take a look at these different roles that are listed here. And starting on page 15 is where you're going to see all these roles explained. Please, good people, take the opportunity and review those roles and become familiar with them. And think about what you're thinking about when you begin to consider what area of interest stands out for me. Where do I see myself being successful? I want you to really consider that when you're looking at these different roles and and getting an understanding of the definition of them. Okay, so that's a brief overview of chapter 1. Again, talking about the helping process. Now we're going to get on to chapter 2. All right, good people. So chapter 2 begins in looking at values and ethics in social work. I want to read this one little section here for you out of the textbook when we talk about the social work mission. Excuse me. And what it reads, it says, social work stands for the social welfare of all people and is committed to social justice through social change at the individual, family, community, agency, and structural levels. When we talk about the mission of being a helping professional, of being a social worker, The focus is all on, again, empowering people, but also looking at um, everything that goes on for this person that is in need of searching for sick, injured, whatever terminology you may want to use, but they are in need of help or change with something. So, a primary focus when we talk about the mission of social work is all about looking at the person in the environment. When we look at the person in the environment and the environment itself, going back a little bit to chapter 1, but again, we pick this up here in chapter 2. We look at the micro, meso, macro level effects or elements that may be impacting this person and the problem that they're presenting you with. Um, and again, that goes through all of this in chapter 2. As we go on throughout chapter 2, the book is into talking about the core social work values. The book looks at service, social justice, dignity and worth of the person, importance of the human relationship, integrity, and competence. Okay, so when we talk about service, again, we're looking at that person in the environment. When we're talking about social justice, it's not so much that we're saying, oh, it's a revolution, but but we're looking at what is it that's going on in society right now that is creating a hurdle that continues to feed this idea of oppression, that continues to label a group of people or a person as other. So when we're talking about social justice, we're talking about making some type of reform, again, from the micro, macro, and meso level, so that we see an impact on the identified client, whomever that may be, or and that could be, again, an individual, excuse me, and or a group. When we talk about the dignity and the worth of a person, come on, y'all. Do we got to talk about this? Yes, we do got to talk about it. The dignity and worth. Every person that we meet with, every person that we see is entitled to and should be treated with the utmost respect, regardless of our issue as a helping professional. There's going to be an assignment next week in your week number 2 folder that's going to be looking at it's called the respectful model, and I'm just going to ask you to examine yourself and think about what you think about in regards to who you can and cannot work with when we begin to talk about cultural competence. But again, when we talk about dignity and worth of the person, we need to make sure that we establish that from the beginning. When we talk about those helping relationships, the working relationships, excuse me, again, we want to make sure that we are having a productive, committed relationship, I guess is what I want to say. The relationship where it is agreeable from worker to client, from client to worker, not a friendship, not a romantic relationship, but this is a working relationship, and that we identified at the beginning. We go back to chapter 1 and we look at intake and assessment, and we identify the end, the termination. And we know that there's a goal that we're working towards in between. So we want to be sure that we're mindful of the importance of those types of relationships. When we talk about integrity and competence as a worker, as a helping professional, you are only as good as the word that you put out there, meaning how you present yourself, the type of work that you do. When we talk about integrity, can someone trust you as a helping professional when we begin thinking about some of the issues that may come before you? When we begin thinking about and talking about working within culturally diverse areas, this whole issue of confidentiality, the whole idea of competence. Do you have the skills to perform the job that you say you can? We're going to talk about that, good people, when we talk about moving on as a helping professional. When we talk about competence, we want to make sure that we are sharing with our clients, consumers, and patients exactly what we are able to do as the individual worker, as well as what the services that our agency or organization are able to provide. What is it that I'm able to do? If I have not received training as a counselor, come on, y'all. Don't bill yourself as a therapeutic counselor. Now, I know that there are several agencies, organizations that use that term interchangeably, excuse me, but we got to be careful about what that means. What does that term mean? The same thing used to happen with the label or the identity of being a social worker. People used to refer to themselves as social workers in the past when they worked in a social service agency. But it was probably about, I want to say maybe 10 years ago, that social work became title protected. So therefore, that means that you cannot refer to yourself as a social worker unless you have graduated from an accredited social work program. So even though you may work for a social service agency, and there may be some people that you know of that they've been working for this agency since the laying of the first brick of the foundation, and they refer to themselves as social worker, but they have a degree in math. You better stop and get your life. You are not a social worker unless you have a degree from an accredited Bachelor of Social Work program, Master of Social Work program, Doctorate in Social Work. That is when you can refer to yourself as a social worker. So I just want to make sure that, that we get that out there, because, hey, I'm going to tell y'all the truth. I have cried many tears. I have slept I have slept on many library tables, working hard to achieve and to receive my title as a social worker. So we want to be mindful of that when we're using that term. As we go on throughout chapter 2, when we talk about social work, or I should say the ethics of social work. I want to jump towards the end of chapter 2, because here's where we get into a little bit of information from the governing body of social work, and it is referred to as the NASW, National Association of Social Workers. The NASW is the governing body, again, over the social work profession. They are the ones who have a subgroup of the NASW is the Council for Social Work Education, CSWE, which is what kind of governs the curriculum within your accredited social work programs. That is what governs the curriculum within our social work program. Excuse me. We follow along with their guidelines from the CSWE to ensure that students graduating from that program can transfer into a bachelor's degree program at a junior level. But regardless of that, let me go back to the NASW. So the NASW is our governing body, and the NASW has the code of ethics, or some folks refer to it as a code of conduct for you as a social worker, you practicing within the profession. There is on Brightspace a link that takes you to the NASW Code of Ethics. And so I'm going to invite you to please make sure you take the opportunity to review that information. Actually, I think with that link, I gave you the Code of Ethics from NASW, ACA, the American Counseling Association, I believe APA as well, the American Psychological Association. These are all very important organizations because they all govern the helping professional. So make sure you take the opportunity to review those, but specifically the one for NASW, because it goes down and it talks a lot about the ethics of care, ethical decision making, ethical dilemmas, how we address that as helping professionals. When we talk about the ethic of care, some of the things that we want to make sure that we are accountable for as helping professionals that the book kind of lays out for us is we want to look at equality for all people, looking at the being responsive, our responsiveness to those folks who we are providing services for. When we talk about our ethical decision making, we have to think about what we're thinking about, y'all, as helping professionals, not to so much always try to police our colleagues. It's not the whoop 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 whoop. Here they come. Look out! Here comes the patrol folks. But we want to be mindful that we are setting each other up for success, if that makes sense. That we're not being critical and judgmental of one another as a helping professional. But if I see that you're treading lightly, or that you're going in a wrong direction, or that you're making decisions for your client, consumer, or patient that may be detrimental to them, then it's my obligation as your colleague to kind of pull your coattail, excuse me, a little bit, and just say, hey, so-and-so, have you thought about, not so much saying, let me make this decision for you, but just to give you some food for thought. In your textbook, there is a diagram here that kind of lays out some steps in resolving some ethical dilemmas that you may run into, excuse me, as a helping professional. Please make sure that you take the opportunity to review that. That's on page 35 in your textbook. Make sure that you take the opportunity to review that and review the case studies that are here. There are some great case studies that talk about ethical dilemmas as social workers or as helping professionals. So don't skip over those, you all. Make sure that you review that information, review the information, excuse me, from the Code of Ethics, from NASW, National Association of Social Workers, APA, the American Psychological Association, ACA, the American Counseling Association. Again, that's going to be posted in the school's LMS system on our course page. So make sure you take that opportunity to look at that. I know I went through chapter 2 relatively quickly, mostly because chapter 2 consists of a lot of case studies, kind of application after you read the information. So please make sure that you take the opportunity to review these case studies. And now I'm going to go on into chapter 3. Okay, y'all, so chapter 3, we are going to review theories in direct social work practice, or direct client work, I should say. And when we talk about learning theories, I know I can hear the sighs already, y'all, but just hang in there with me. When we talk about theories, it's very important that that we learn a theoretical perspective so that we have an idea of how we are going to approach our client, consumer, or patient according to what their needs are. Excuse me, and what may fit best or work best with our client in the situation that they may be experiencing. So chapter 3, it gives us just a really quick, brief introduction. Excuse me, I'm sorry, good people. A brief introduction to several different theories that you're going to become familiar with right now, or I should say be introduced to now, but then as you move on for your bachelor's degree, yeah, I said it, y'all. I know you're going for your bachelor's. But as you move on throughout for your bachelor's degree, you'll delve into these theories a little bit further. So the first theory that we want to talk about is going to be that psychodynamic theory. With the psychodynamic theory, this theory closely relates to a theorist that we probably will be very familiar with throughout our studies as we go for our bachelor's degree. And that is Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, when we talk about that psychodynamic perspective, that psychodynamic perspective is that Freud encourages us to gain insight into what we're thinking about and why we're thinking about it. Some of the other theorists that function under the psychodynamic perspective would include Erik Erikson. He has 8 stages of development. And again, as you move on throughout your educational journey, you'll study these theories in more detail, and especially if you get into Gen Psych. So Sigmund Freud has his personality development, the id, the ego, the superego. Erik Erikson has 8 stages of personality development. Jean Piaget has 4 stages of of personality development. These theorists, again, talking about the importance of thinking about what we think about that creates our personality. So that's that psychodynamic perspective. The cognitive theoretical perspective is all about behavior. How are we conducting ourselves, but also what is it that's going on for the individual that is affecting their behavior. One of the behaviorists, excuse me, that we talk about a lot in the helping profession, when we, one of the theorists, I'm sorry, when we talk about the cognitive behavioral therapies as a helping profession, is Albert Ellis. And Albert Ellis, he talks about looking at what's going on right now in a person's life and how is that impacting their behavior. Again, that's talking about our behavioral theories. Then we get down to our humanistic theories. Our humanistic theories, we're looking at from taking this ecological perspective when we talk about the whole person. Excuse me. The humanistic theory looks at the person themselves. It's person-centered theory. And when we talk about this humanistic perspective, one of the key theorists that you'll see repeated fairly often or studied fairly often in humanistic theory is Carl Rogers. And he did a lot when we talk about gaining this understanding about how our clients may view things, and how they are able to alter their behavior based on things functioning, or I should say things being addressed specifically for them, that person-centered theory. When we get to the last type of theory, this is referred to as postmodern theories. Now, when we talk about postmodern theories, I'm just going to jump real quickly to the main one that our book talks about, and that is looking at our systems theory. I'm sorry, let me go back a little bit. When we talk about when we talk about the postmodern is looking at that solution focused theory. It's not so much that we're focusing on being premature problem solvers, but as the book states, we're looking on how is it that we are constructing our goals, our action steps that's going to lead our client, consumer, and patient to having success. So we're looking at the outcome, but again, while we're guiding our client, consumer, or patient through the process. Now, those are different types of theories that the book introduces us to. One of the ones that I want to jump to, though, towards the middle of our text, or middle of this chapter, is our systems theory. Now, when we talk about the systems theory, this systems theory is something that, again, brings to our attention that there are two basic types of boundaries that our clients, consumers, or patients may be addressing. And the book refers to it as our impermeable versus our permeable boundaries. The impermeable boundaries are like a closed system. This is under our systems theory. And then our permeable boundaries are the open systems, things that we can get in exchange from. So when we're talking about the systems theory, we want to look at what may be hindering, what may be hindering the helping process, but also what may be helping or what may be accessible through the helping process. Excuse me, good people. I finally succumbed to sipping some water. So when we're talking about, again, these different theories of direct practice, we want to make sure that we're looking at things, going back to chapter 1, from that micro, meso, macro perspective. That micro is that individual perspective, what's going on for this person, again, the whole person that's impacting the problem. That meso perspective, we're looking at, again, the small group, the family, what is going on that's adding to or contributing to the problem. When we talk about the macro perspective, we're looking at the community or an organization as a whole. What is feeding into the issues that are creating problems, again, for that particular client base. So all of this kind of leads us up to this phrase that I used for chapter 1, but we're now getting to that here in chapter 3, and that is called that ecological perspective. Ecological perspective, and this is coming out of your book, refers to the concrete way for understanding the person in the environment. When we talk about the ecological perspective, again, this is coming from your book. It says here, other important concepts that are part of understanding a person in the environment are the role of stress and coping measures that a person has within their environment. So when we're talking about the ecological perspective, it's everything, good people, everything about what's going on for this client, consumer, or patient that they're bringing to you when they are sick, injured, in need of, when they're hurt, when they're looking for some guidance. When you look in your textbooks, on page 51, there is a box here. Please don't ignore this box, good people, because it gives you a lot of great information in regards to the different concepts that you need to consider when we're talking about the ecological perspective. It gives us this insight and a clear understanding of how we can approach working with our client, consumer, or patient. So please make sure, that is on page 51. Please make sure that you check that out and that you don't overlook that. Finally, the last thing that I want to talk about in chapter 3 is going to be information relating to our strength-based perspective. Our strength perspective. What does that mean? Exactly what it says. We're looking at what are our clients' strengths, but we also can't overlook what their weaknesses are. What is it that gives our clients that want to? What is it that they have that is something that they hold on to, something that they can dig into that helps them identify who they are and how successful they can be? It's important that we help our clients to understand and to highlight their strengths, but also, excuse me, not to shy away from their weaknesses. Understand what the weaknesses are. Don't dwell on them, excuse me, but identify them, but also identify the strength. And now let's recognize, how can we move beyond that weakness holding us down? So that's something, again, that's very important for us to pay attention to as a helping professional. As we're doing that, when we talk about our strength-based perspective, we kind of automatically transition into the last thing that chapter 3 talks to us about, and that's this whole concept of developing cultural competence. When we talk about developing cultural competence, we're looking at, how am I, the helping professional, viewing my client, consumer, or patient, not through my own personal lens, but through my cultural lens? Meaning that, am I judging them based on my ideas, my concepts, or based on their ideas, their concepts? When we get into talking about cultural competence, this is where we, again, have to challenge ourselves to think about what we're thinking about, but think beyond the obvious and get ourselves in a position to where we recognize what our client, consumer, or patient excuse me, may be dealing with on a regular basis, that may dictate, that may impact, that may alter the outcome of their helping process. That ecological perspective. I got to view things through my cultural lens so that I can see things from my client's perspective. Again, getting this whole idea of empathy. Excuse me, empathy, not sympathy, but empathy. Having a respect for what someone else may be experiencing and how they may be addressing it. All right, good people. So that's the first 3 chapters. The introduction to the helping process, values and ethics, and theoretical perspectives when we're talking about working as a helping professional. So as you read through chapters 1, 2, and 3, please make sure you take the opportunity. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, or concerns about the information as you post that on the discussion board. So I guess at this point, I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease, and I'll see you on a discussion forum.